So I want you to picture a scene. It's London. It's January 1870. And you are Charles Spurgeon.
The Prince of Creatures.
Exactly. You're probably the most famous orator on the planet at this moment. You have, thousands of people packed into the Metropolitan Tabernacle every single week just to hear you speak.
And the topic for the day is, well, it's a small one.
Yeah, just the end of the world. Judgment Day. The final destiny of every human soul that has ever lived. No big deal.
Right. The pressure must have been immense.
Oh, it gets worse. Here's the kicker. You haven't written the sermon.
What?
You're so swamped. Administrative work, fending off critics, running the orphanage. You've had zero prep time. So literally minutes before you walk out to face that sea of faces. You grab a used envelope out of the bin.
Oh.
You scribble a few headings on the back and you walk up to the pulpit.
That is the ultimate public speaking nightmare. That is the very definition of winging it. Most people would just crumble.
But for Spurgeon, that was just a Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
And the result wasn't some rambling mess. It became one of the most logically dense, terrifying, and visually spectacular sermons of the entire 19th century.
It's just incredible context, isn't it? We're talking about the sermon, The Final Separation. And, thanks to his friend, W. Williams, who actually kept that envelope. He kept it. We have this little artifact of history that birthed this huge theological argument.
And that's what we're doing today. We're diving deep into that sermon. But we're not just looking at it as, a historical curiosity. We're really trying to unpack Spurgeon's worldview. And it's a worldview that is startlingly binary.
It really is. And that's what makes this source material so fascinating. He completely rejects the idea of a middle ground. And he argues for a criteria of judgment that I think will actually surprise a lot of you listeners.
I think so, too. It's not about who sang the loudest hymns or who knew the most theology.
Not at all.
And honestly, reading through this, it kind of shakes you a bit. Because we live in a world of gray areas, right? Everything's nuanced. And Spurgeon just comes in with this absolute black and white.
Yeah, there's no room for it's complicated in his thinking here.
So let's get into it. Spurgeon doesn't ease the audience in. He starts right away with the spectacle. He sets the stage for what he calls the Great Gathering.
And the way he describes the end of the world, it's not abstract, it's cinematic.
It really is.
High definition. That's how I read it. He wants you to visualize the return of Jesus, but he's so specific about the physicality of it.
Right.
I think that gets lost in modern spirituality sometimes, where everything's a bit wispy, ethereal. Spurgeon says, no, when the king returns, he's coming in the same body that ascended. He's descending with clouds. It's a tangible physical event.
And the centerpiece of this entire scene is the throne, the great white throne. But I love the detail he uses. He describes it as a sapphire stone, like a massive looking glass.
That image really stuck with me, too, a looking glass.
Right. Usually you think of a throne. You think of a seat of power where the king sits and looks at you. But Spurgeon describes it as a mirror. The idea is that the throne itself reflects the entire assembly. So when you stand there, you aren't just seeing the judge. You are seeing yourself, your whole life, your sins, everything, just reflected back at you in perfect clarity.
Which is a terrifying thought. There is absolutely nowhere to hide your face. And the scale of this crowd, Spurgeon really flexes his historical knowledge here.
He does.
He doesn't just say, oh, everybody will be there. He takes you on this tour of human history to make you feel the weight of the numbers. He starts listing these groups that would have felt ancient, even to his Victorian audience.
He talks about the myriads from before the flood.
Yeah.
The people who built the Tower of Babel.
And he mentions the armies of Xerxes. I love this part because he pauses on Xerxes and leverages this famous historical anecdote about him.
Oh, yeah. Refresh my memory on that one.
So, Xerxes, the Persian king, he's reviewing his massive army. Hundreds of thousands of men, the biggest army the world had ever seen. And he just starts weeping.
Why?
His advisors ask him why, and he says he weeps because he realized that in 100 years, not a single one of those strong, vibrant men would still be alive. They'd all be dust.
He was mourning their mortality.
Exactly. But Spurgeon just flips that completely on its head. He says, essentially, Xerxes was wrong.
Because here they are.
Right. They aren't gone. They've risen. Spurgeon says, the dead are not dead. They were just waiting. And now, the Greeks, the Romans, the Huns, the Goths, he says they're swarming like bees from a hive. It's this overwhelming picture.
The imagery he uses for the resurrection itself is just as intense. He says the sea turns into solid pavement. just so it can yield up its dead. The whole earth basically becomes one giant opening grave.
It's his way of saying that no one is lost to history. We might worry about being forgotten, but Spurgeon's point is, don't worry, you won't be. You are on the muster roll, whether you want to be or not.
So everyone is gathered. The stage is set. The sea is solid. The sapphire throne is glowing. And this is where we hit the absolute core of Spurgeon's argument. The title is The Final Separation. And this is where he just demolishes the way most of us think about humanity.
This is what you call the myth of the middle.
Yeah, let's unpack that, because naturally, we humans, we love a bell curve.
We do. It feels right. It feels fair.
You've got the saints on one end, Mother Teresa, the martyrs. Then you've got the monsters on the other, Hitler, serial killers. And then there's this huge bulge in the middle. That's us.
The decent people.
Right. The people who pay their taxes, maybe tell a white lie here and there, but generally mean well. The I'm not a murderer, but I'm not a saint crowd.
Spurgeon takes a sledgehammer to that bell curve. He looks at the text in Matthew 25, the separation of the sheep and the goats, and he basically says, show me the third group.
And there isn't one.
There isn't one. He says humanity is divided into exactly two categories. Sheep on the right, goats on the left. There is no middle holding pen.
He's so firm on this. He lists all these binary states. You're either alive or dead. There's no spiritual swoon or coma. You're converted or unconverted. You're in the light or you're in the darkness.
He uses the word loiter. He says people try to loiter between two opinions. They want to keep their options open. But he argues that in the eyes of the judge, that's impossible. You are either entirely for him or entirely against him.
And this leads him to a pretty aggressive attack on the idea of purgatory. Now, we have to remember, Spurgeon is a Victorian Protestant. He's not a fan of the Catholic Church.
He pulls no punches here. He calls purgatory an invention of the Pope. But he gets specific. He says it was invented to fill the cellar and the larder.
So he's basically calling it a fundraising scheme.
Exactly. He even quotes the early reformers who nicknamed purgatory pick purse.
Pick purse. Wow, that is such a vivid insult.
It is, but his theological point is serious. He's saying that the whole idea of purgatory, this middle place where you can work off your debt or be prayed into heaven, is a dangerous lie because it makes people complacent. It suggests there's a plan B.
And Spurgeon wants his listeners to feel the terror of no plan B. The division happens now, in this life. And once you die, that's it. It is fixed.
Okay, so we have the binary, sheep and goats. But here's the problem, and even Spurgeon admits this. When we look around at a church service or just at society, it is really hard to tell who is who.
Almost impossible for us, right?
Yeah, and Spurgeon spends a lot of time on this difficulty of distinction. He starts with a natural analogy that would have resonated with his audience, especially anyone who had traveled to the East or the Mediterranean.
The sheep and the goats, they look alike.
They do. In that part of the world, the sheep can have this coarse, hairy wool, and some goats look quite similar. If you're not a shepherd, if you're just, a tourist, you can't easily tell them apart from a distance.
And he applies that directly to the pews. He talks about the tares and the wheat, the weeds that look exactly like the crop until harvest.
And he warns pastors about this. He basically says, don't you try to play judge, because if you try to root out the bad people from the church, you'll inevitably mess it up. You'll hurt the good people too. We just aren't smart enough to know what's really in someone's heart.
But then he makes this really interesting socioeconomic observation. And I thought this felt incredibly modern.
This is a fascinating bit of sociology from 1870. He observes that in his congregation, if a poor man loses his faith, if he backslides, it's usually obvious.
He stops coming to church.
Right. He goes back to the pub. He goes back to his old life. He doesn't have the same social pressure to keep up appearances. But the middle class, the respectable people,
they stay.
They stay. Spurgeon says they keep showing up because it's the fashionable or proper thing to do. They maintain the external habit of religion even if the internal fire is completely dead.
That is such a sharp call out. He's saying that respectability itself can be a mask. So you have these people sitting in the pews who look like sheep, they act like sheep, but internally they're goats.
And that's why the divine view is the pivot point of the sermon. Humans are fooled. We're fooled by a nice suit and regular attendance. But Spurgeon says Christ has an eye of fire.
The eye of fire, what does he mean by that?
It means instant penetrating insight. It means he reads the heart. And Spurgeon offers this dual comfort and warning here. On the one hand, it's comforting. He says not one sincere, feeble soul will be lost. You might be weak, you might doubt yourself. But if you are a sheep, he knows. You won't be accidentally sorted into the wrong pile.
But the flip side is the warning.
Right. Not one hypocrite sneaks into heaven. He says you won't be able to keep your sheep's clothing on. The disguise just falls apart instantly under that gaze.
And this leads us to the emotional core of the sermon, which is the sharpness of the cut. Spurgeon really dwells on how this separation just tears through our most intimate human relationships.
It's brutal. It really is. He dismantles the whole idea that our earthly bonds can save us. You know, we tend to think, well, my wife is very religious, so I'm sort of covered by association.
As Spurgeon says.
Absolutely not. He gives these examples of people working side by side. 2 men at a plow, 2 carpenters at a bench. They work together every day. They know each other's lives. But one is taken, the other left.
It's the intimacy of the connection that makes it so shocking.
Yes. He brings it right into the home. 2 women grinding at a mill, maybe a mother and a daughter, and then he gets to the most intimate one of all, 2 in one bed.
That's the image that sticks, husbands and wives.
He talks about spouses being separated for all of eternity, and he emphasizes that word fixed. The gulf between them is fixed. There is no bridge. There is no hope of restoration. He says the most painful part of this judgment will be the severing of those ties.
It just raises the stakes enormously. So we have a binary separation. It's permanent, and it cuts through everything we hold dear. Which brings us to the trillion-dollar question. What is the rule? How does the judge decide who goes right and who goes left?
This is what you call the surprise rule.
Right. Because if you asked a typical Victorian churchgoer, or even a modern one, what gets you into the sheep category, what would they say?
Oh, they'd list all the religious duties. I went to church. I was baptized. I took communion. I sang the hymns. I believed all the right doctrines.
And Spurgeon looks at the text and says,
none of that is in there. The judge doesn't ask about your theology. He doesn't ask if you bowed at the right time. He points to actions of mercy.
I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink.
Feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, visiting the sick, visiting the imprisoned. These are the criteria that he highlights.
Okay, we have to pause here, because this is where people can get tripped up. Spurgeon is the prince of preachers. He's a staunch defender of salvation by grace.
Through faith alone, not by works.
Right. So isn't he contradicting himself? Is he suddenly saying you have to earn your way into heaven by working at a soup kitchen?
It sounds like it, doesn't it? But this is the critical theological nuance we have to nail down. Spurgeon argues that these actions are the evidence of salvation, not the cause of it.
Okay, unpack that distinction for me. How does that work?
He uses this beautiful analogy of a mother and her child. He asks, why does a mother care for her baby? Is she following some act of parliament that says, Rule 1, feed the baby?
No, of course not. It's instinct. It's love.
Exactly. It comes from her nature. She can't help but love and care for the child. Spurgeon argues that when you become a sheep, when you are truly converted, you get a new nature. And you do good deeds not to earn points, but because it is now your nature to love and show mercy.
So the good deeds are the symptoms. They're the proof that the spiritual life is actually inside you.
Correct.
Yeah.
If you don't have the symptoms, if you have no mercy, no love for the poor, then his argument is you don't have the disease, so to speak. You don't have the life of Christ in you.
Which leads to this concept of unconscious goodness, which I found to be the most profound part of the whole sermon.
It's incredible. Look at the text again. When the king says, come, you blessed, for I was hungry and you gave me food, how do the sheep respond? Do they say, yes, Lord, we worked very hard on that?
No. They're completely confused. They ask, Lord, when did we see you hungry?
They are surprised. That is the key. They didn't know they were doing anything great. They weren't keeping a scorecard. They weren't thinking, okay, I gave a sandwich to that guy, that's plus 10 points for heaven.
They just did it because they saw a need.
They acted out of love. They saw a human being in pain, and they helped. Spurgeon contrasts this with the philanthropists who have what he calls hermetically sealed pockets.
Hermetically sealed pockets. That's a great phrase.
It's about people who only give if they get a plaque with their name on it, or if they're shamed into it. He says true charity is done behind the door. The sheep did these things in secret, often without even realizing the spiritual magnitude of what they were doing.
It's a really powerful check on our motivation, isn't it? If you're doing good things so that people see you, or even so that God sees you to let you into heaven, Spurgeon would say that's not the evidence of a sheep.
Exactly. If you're calculating your goodness, it's not goodness, it's a transaction. And this judgment is not a commercial exchange. It's a revelation of character.
And as we wrap this up, we have to look at how he brings it all home.
Mm-hmm.
He ends with this paradox about the judge that is just Haunting.
He does. He focuses on who is actually speaking the sentence. We tend to think of a judge as this stern, cold, impartial figure. But Spurgeon points out that the judge is Jesus.
The embodiment of love.
The man who wept over Jerusalem, the man who died for his enemies. And Spurgeon argues this makes the condemnation infinitely worse.
How so? You'd think a loving judge would be more lenient.
But Spurgeon says, if incarnate love itself looks at you and says, "Depart from me, you who are cursed," then you must be truly cursed. If anger condemns you, you can say, "Oh, he was just mad." If pure justice condemns you, you could argue he was too harsh. But if love condemns you...
And there's no argument left.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It means your corruption is so absolute that even love itself cannot embrace you. It removes any ability to argue back. It's chilling.
It really takes away any hope of an appeal.
And he adds that because Christ is also the truth, your own conscience will agree with the sentence. In that moment of absolute clarity, you won't be able to debate it. You'll just know that the judgment is just.
It's such a stark worldview. There is no middle ground, no loitering, no neutral zone. You're either with him or against him.
And that's the final takeaway. He actually talks about his own emotion preaching this. He says he feels like sitting down and weeping rather than standing and speaking. He wants people to feel the urgency of that separation now before it becomes fixed forever.
And it really makes you think about that unconscious goodness we talked about. It leaves us with a really provocative question, I think.
It does. If the righteous were surprised that their actions even counted, when did we see you? What does that suggest about people who are very confident in their own goodness?
Exactly. If you're the one keeping score, are you even playing the right game?
Are the people who are most confident in their resume of good works actually the ones most at risk? It suggests that true goodness isn't a calculation, it's a character. And that's a very dangerous thought for anyone relying on a checklist to get into heaven.
A lot to think about. That's our deep dive into Charles Spurgeon's The Final Separation. Thanks for listening.